Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into the story of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement. But we're coming at this from a really unique angle. Our source material analyzes his life like a clinical case study, using the tools of human psychology. So, let's get into it.
So here's the big question driving this whole thing. How on earth does a regular person go from being a local religious thinker to claiming he's the answer to prophecies for all of humanity? I mean, that's a huge leap, right? And it's one that's fascinated people for a long, long time.
And this is where that unique perspective really comes into play. The source material treats this story almost like a doctor would a patient. It makes the case that this incredible transformation isn't some one-off miracle, but that it actually follows a very recognizable psychological pattern, a path that other charismatic figures have walked before.
All right, so let's start with the diagnosis. To even begin to understand the man, we first have to understand the world he was born into.
So picture this, it's 19th century India, and Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is born right into the middle of some serious turmoil. The old Muslim empires had crumbled under the British, and now everywhere you look in the town's squares, in the new pamphlets coming off the printing presses, you have Christian missionaries and Hindu reformers openly challenging the very foundations of Islam. It was a deep, deep crisis of confidence for the whole community.
And right into this chaos steps Mirza, a quiet, scholarly guy from a family that had seen better days. According to the source, it's not hard to see how a man like this, totally immersed in religious books and feeling the pain of his community's decline, could start to believe he was chosen for a special mission, to be the one to defend the faith when everyone else seemed to be dropping the ball.
And that feeling, that sense of a special mission, well, it kicked off one of the most remarkable climbs you can imagine. We're going to see how he went from just another defender of the faith to someone claiming a direct divine appointment.
The source lays this out in 3 really clear steps. First, he claims he's a Mujaddid, which is a divinely guided reformer. It's a bold claim, for sure, but not totally unheard of in Islamic history. Then he levels up. In 1889, his followers take a formal pledge to him, which creates a whole new community with him at the center. And then comes the big one. In 1891, he declares he is the promised Messiah, not Jesus literally come back to life, but his second coming in spirit.
So you might be wondering, how does this escalate so fast?
Well, the source points to a fascinating concept called the charismatic feedback loop. Think of it like this. The leader feels a divine calling. His followers see this, and their devotion just explodes. That devotion then feeds back to the leader, making him even more confident in his mission. It's a powerful cycle that can make claims grow bigger and bigger very, very quickly.
And this feedback loop, this cycle of belief, it pushed his claims into even more controversial areas, forcing him to completely redefine some of the bedrock rules of his religion.
Okay, get this. It's a complete 180. Around 1890, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is on record, in writing, saying that this other messianic figure, the Mahdi, is not coming. He dismissed the whole idea. But then, just a year or two later, he claims that, guess what? He is the Mahdi. It was a total, undeniable reversal.
So how do you explain something like that? The source brings in another classic psychological idea, cognitive dissonance. It's that really uncomfortable feeling you get in your brain when you hold 2 completely contradictory thoughts at the same time. The Mahdi isn't coming, and I am the Mahdi. To fix that discomfort, you don't admit you were wrong. No. You reinterpret the past. His followers were told his earlier statements were just misunderstood, which kept his record of being right perfectly intact.
The claims just kept escalating. And in 1901, he made what was arguably his biggest claim within an Islamic context. He said he was a prophet. Now, he added a twist. He was a shadow prophet, completely subordinate to the Prophet Muhammad. But still, this was a radical move that required completely redefining a core belief that had been settled for 1,400 years.
So now he's claiming to be a prophet. Well, prophets make prophecies, right? But what happens when those specific, testable predictions don't happen? This, our source argues, is where you can see the belief system building walls to protect itself from reality.
Let's look at 2 pretty famous examples the source highlights. He prophesied that an opponent of his, a man named Abdul Athim, would die within 15 months. The deadline came and went, and Athim was perfectly fine. In fact, he lived for decades longer. The explanation? Oh, he must have repented in secret.
In another case, he predicted a woman's father and husband would die if she refused to marry him. The father did die, but the husband lived a long, full life. The explanation for that? Well, the prophecy was just conditional. You start to see the pattern, right? The source argues this is a classic way to make a belief system totally bulletproof. When reality doesn't line up with a prediction, you don't throw out the belief. Instead, you reinterpret the failure in a way that actually confirms the leader's special insight. It creates a system that, logically, can never be proven wrong. So, at this point, he's claimed every major title within Islam. Where do you possibly go from there? Well, you go universal. He starts to position himself as a savior for all humanity, following what our source calls a well-trodden path.
And this is where the claims just went into the stratosphere. He started arguing that he was the fulfillment of prophecies in other religions too. He was the spiritual return of Krishna for Hindus. He was the great Sakyant for Zoroastrians. His self-image just exploded, from a reformer for Muslims to the one single person where all of human religious history finally meets.
And this quote from his own writings, wow, it really shows you the final stage of the psychological journey. I saw myself in a dream as the eye of Allah, and I was certain that it was He. At this point, the line between the human servant and the divine has become almost completely blurred. His own consciousness is now wrapped up with God's.
And here it is. This is the core argument of our source material, laid out plain and simple. Just look at this pattern. The path of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, from reformer to universal avatar, is almost identical to the paths of other 19th century figures, like the Bab in Persia or Joseph Smith in America. The details are different, the theology is different, but the source argues the psychological ladder of escalating claims, it's the same.
So let's pull this all together for a final analysis. When we look at this story through this clinical lens, what does it ultimately tell us?
The source's conclusion is really direct. It suggests that this whole journey, from that quiet, bookish man to a universal prophet, is explained more easily by these known psychological forces we've been talking about, cognitive dissonance, feedback loops, than it is by a singular divine plan. The source isn't questioning his sincerity, to be clear, it's just analyzing the process.
Which, of course, leaves us with the ultimate question that frames this entire explainer. When we look at a story like this, are we seeing a case study in human psychology, or are we seeing divine revelation? The source gives its clinical take, but that question just sort of hangs there in the air. And we'll end on this one last, really thought-provoking observation from the source. You know, maybe the most psychologically fascinating part of this whole thing isn't the claims themselves. It's the fact that a global community, millions of people strong, was built on these claims and is still thriving today. It's an incredible testament to the power of belief, and it leaves us to wonder about the complex, amazing ways that psychology and faith can intersect to truly shape our world.